Welcome to the Neighborhood Law Center. I'm your host, Melvin Burris. And our guest today, we have a special guest, Attorney Stephen Rosenfield. And our topic today is civil rights in the criminal injustice system. Thank you, Counselor, for coming today.
Thanks for inviting me, Mel.
Okay. To get us started, could you tell our audience a little bit about yourself? You have quite a decorated career, and we'd like to hear about it.
I'm in my late 60s. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I mention that because as a child, I was awfully protected growing up in a white, Jewish, middle-class neighborhood. School was the same way. And it wasn't until post-college, I went to the University of Miami in Florida. I got a degree in engineering. And for the first time, I started reading socially instead of math and science. And I could not understand why black people were so angry in America. That's when I picked up a book by Eldridge Cleaver called Soul on Ice, and it radicalized me. I read books that influenced him, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Ho Chi Minh. And with that assortment of views, I got a better appreciation for the racial divide in America. With following that, I was able to read history and draw from my own experiences. We had riots in Pittsburgh in the late 60s, along with many of the other major cities across the country. And I decided, following the old adage from the 60s, I wanted to be part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. And so I joined the VISTA program, John Kennedy's domestic equivalent of the Peace Corps, Volunteers in Service to America. And I ended up spending 4 years doing that. My first year in Cumberland, Virginia, about an hour south of here, where for the first time in my life, I got to know black people. And that occurred because I was assigned to live with a black family in Cumberland. And for 2 weeks, I was the son that they never had. Just a wonderful experience. And
that experience compelled you to go to law school, but you didn't go to law school. You wanted to practice law, and you read for the bar. Now, tell us about that experience. That's kind of unusual.
Virginia at the time was only one of 4 states, and now one of only 3 states, that allows somebody to apprentice the law, much like Thomas Jefferson did, Clarence Darrow, Abe Lincoln, instead of going to law school. At the turn of the 20th century, there were more law readers in America than there were law students, and of course that has changed dramatically. I completed the program in the required time and took the bar exam and passed it. So I've been practicing for 40 years since 1977.
Okay, congratulations. And one of the areas you picked was civil rights. Could you expound on that for us, a little bit about your civil rights experience, and why did you choose the civil rights? I guess because of your experience in the VISTA program motivated you in a way.
That's exactly right. Having been radicalized by my reading and my experiences, to be part of the solution, I thought that a lawyer maintained a great deal of power with his profession. And I wanted to share that power with people less powerful. Mm-hmm. And following an example of Clarence Darrow, I chose to represent the weak against the strong, employees against employers, tenants against landlords. So my whole orientation was to try to help the underdog.
Okay. Now, we mentioned civil rights. Many folks don't know when their civil rights have been violated. Could you kind of expound on that for us? How do I know my civil rights have been violated, Counselor?
You know, that term has come to mean that people have had either their constitution or statutory rights violated. The Constitution is our bedrock, and it is from the Constitution that we derive all of our statutory laws. So when we have a right violated, it's either going to be constitutional or statutory. The Constitution was meant to protect all of us citizens against the encroachment of the government. So we have the First Amendment does not apply if you're in your working for a private employer who tells you not to talk on the job. But if it's the government who tells you not to print something or not to speak, then it calls into question whether your First Amendment rights were violated. Statutory rights are also civil rights because these statutes were meant to protect us from even private forms of discrimination in employment and housing. These are all statutory rights that we gain from mostly the federal government, but also there are some state statutes which are intended to protect people against bad behavior by private sector.
Now, we call these our protected rights. Now, what are those based on gender, race?
We have a good set of laws, but they're always subject to interpretation. And so I have a criticism first about why we even need to have statutes. It puzzles me that we have to tell Americans not to deny black people a meal when they're traveling on the interstate, or we have to tell people not to discriminate against a woman who seeks employment or housing. It bothers me. But the truth of the matter is that we need those protections, and so we call on those kinds of laws to protect us individuals.
Okay. So now that we kind of know what some of our rights are in housing, race, gender, sexual discrimination, I guess it's basically discrimination in these areas that we're referring to.
Sure. Handicapped people from different countries, all of these are protected in various statutes that we have there.
Okay. So now so my rights has been violated. Now, what do I do? What is the first step that a person should to do besides calling you to analyze what their rights are and what they should be doing?
People have the opportunity to file a lawsuit if they want on their own, but like so many other professions, it's not advised. Sometimes people cannot find lawyers, prisoners for instance, and they have to do it by themselves. But seeking out a lawyer who is knowledgeable in the area for which they seek representation. A problem is across America, and certainly in Virginia, there are very few civil rights lawyers. There are only a handful that practice it with regularity. Some dabble in it, but they're hard to find. You won't open up a telephone book or even call the Virginia State Bar for a referral and find civil rights lawyers.
So why is it so difficult to protect a person's rights when they've been discriminated against?
I have been bothered over the many years I've been practicing that more lawyers do not take up civil rights law. It is the highest form of contribution we can make to the community to represent those with fewer powers against those who are more powerful. But there's not a lot of money in it, and therein lies the problem. Even though we have statutory attorney's fees if you win as the plaintiff, we have judges who cut back on the amount that they award. We have Supreme Court justices who interpret these wonderful laws so narrowly and make the process so difficult and create huge hurdles that civil rights lawyers who once practiced in these areas no longer find it sufficiently financially rewarding.
Okay. Well, we could talk about this a little later, but I was at a meeting with the first African American Historical Society of History, and on February 16th. And I was curious about the theme that you, or the fact that you stated that you were ashamed of America. Would you highlight the way you feel and why, and what is your alternative?
I cannot think of a decade in America which has been progressive. I look back at the story about the monk in the hills in the West Indies who documented in writing about Christopher Columbus coming ashore and enslaving the residents, committing genocide, and yet we have a parade every year. We have a national holiday called Columbus Day, and that starts the snowball rolling down the hill. We kidnapped black citizens from their homeland, brought them on ships and enslaved them for so many years. Shameful, immoral conduct. Turn of the century, we still had child labor. We had black people who were not able to get jobs because of discrimination, many coming north to the industries and getting more menial jobs. We slaughtered Indians and to this day discriminate against them so badly. We enslaved Asian people to build our railroads, and we honor Andrew Carnegie and Andrew Mellon and those who made money off the backs of enslaved people. We named the capital of our nation after one of the largest slaveholders who became wealthy as a result of the kidnapping and enslavement of human beings. I'm ashamed of all of that. You can point to any decade you want, and we are just blighted with indecent treatment and inhumane treatment of large segments of our society, especially now. Those people who are the least powerful in our society, and that is prisoners.
Okay. What I want to ask you then is, how do you expect us to change things if we don't do it with the laws given to us, the civil rights laws, the statutes? How do you think things can get changed?
Well, I'm enamored by those people that I respect and used as a role model at their optimism about America, and I'm a pessimist. I do not have great hopes, and it stems in large part just taking a snapshot today at how we continue to be so backward. We have the riots in Ferguson and Baltimore requiring that we investigate police departments, and indeed the investigations have concluded that we have institutional and structural racism in our law enforcement community. That does not bode well for 2016 and now 2017 as we go forward. I wish there were more young people going to law school, reading law, and becoming civil rights lawyers, but the debt they incur in law school prohibits them from doing really good work. They just can't afford to take public interest law.
Okay, so you're a pessimist. Tell me, pessimist, counselor, what would you do to change things? How would you change? How would you organize? What would you teach to change the position of those that's been, as you were saying, and which has happened, which have been discriminated against for so long? Tell me your game plan.
Well, so many things begin with the family and then with the children who go to school. So here we have Black History Month in February. And what do we really teach? We teach biographies of great black leaders, but we don't teach the truth and history about how destructive America has been to black people and continues to this day. There may not be modern day slaves, but to have the kind of discrimination that we have is a moral outrage. And so I think schools are a good place to encourage, people should encourage their school boards. And when I say encourage, I mean to demonstrate, because it just isn't going to happen with predominantly white people running school systems, and even black people who are on school boards aren't advocates enough for teaching what I think is a history of radicalism, and they ought to let white kids and black kids and Hispanic kids know the history of America and encourage them to that the change, any change that will come about will be with them.
I agree, 100%. We're at our break time. I'm going to say this is the Neighborhood Law Center. I'm your host, Melvin Burris. Our distinguished guest is attorney Stephen Rosenfield. The topic is civil rights in the criminal and justice system. One thing, Counselor, I read about was the fact that you're ready to retire. After toiling in the fields for the last 40 years, you're ready to ride off into the sunset. However, one of the things you said was that you're going to do more prison rights work. So that's kind of interesting. You go from civil rights to prison rights. So what are prison rights? Could you let us know, and what rights do prisoners have while in jail?
They're few and far between.
Okay.
It's tragic. We pay lip service that prisoners do not lose their constitutional rights when they enter jail or prison. But the truth of the matter is that we repeat our failures again and again. Definition of insanity. We have a prison system in Virginia that is a total failure, has been for a century. We continue to do exactly the same thing year in and year out, and we spend a ton of money. The highest budgeted item is keeping up our prison system. So what rights do prisoners have? They're just very few. They're completely at the mercy of other human beings. And
give us some statistics of the number of people that are in prison right now, women, men, racial classification.
There are about 32,000 prisoners in our state system. There are, I don't know the numbers, there are thousands of people in our local jails across the Commonwealth. In the state system, even though Virginia constitutes about 12% black population, we have about 60% of the prison population is black. We have a little over half of our population are women, and those numbers continue to climb. And I don't know the precise percentage of those 32,000, but we have we have reconstituted some of the male prisons to accommodate women, which just is indicative of the rise in the number of women being charged and convicted of crimes.
So when you're saying that you are going to take up the plight of the prisoner, in what areas do you see that need to be?
Well, it's true that at the end of this calendar year and spilling into 2018, I am not going to take any more cases. But my idea is that we try to find funds and we establish a foundation to hire lawyers who do nothing but represent prisoners in their conditions of their confinement. That's my idea.
Okay. For instance, is it a health issue? Is it not getting enough exercise or staying too long in their cells? Where are the deficiencies that we're deferring to here?
I think medical care is probably the number one issue, and I base that on the number of letters that I get from prisoners, that overwhelmingly they are receiving prescription drugs, but they're not given the number of pills each day so that the prison can save money. It's all about money, and as a result, we have sometimes we have physicians who are really incompetent. We have them told not to send people for tests because it's so expensive to send them to the hospitals or to specialists, and so we have people who just are the subjects of malpractice, but they don't have any wherewithal to know what they can do, and there just aren't lawyers out there. We have people who are handicapped. We have blind prisoners about whom the prisons do not know how to care for. We have deaf prisoners, and likewise they are often discriminated against by prisons that just don't know what to do for deaf individuals. The list goes on and on about regarding education and psychological care. It's estimated about a third of those in prison have some kind of a mental illness. I know from experience that there are many who are intellectually disabled, and they wouldn't know how to bring a lawsuit if their rights are violated. Our rules in Virginia are the most restrictive in the nation. For instance, if you had your rights violated by a police officer, you would have 2 years within which to file suit against that officer. And yet, if you're in prison and a correctional officer harms you, you have 30 days within which to file a grievance, and if you don't, you're forever barred from bringing the lawsuit. It's just insensitive. It doesn't take into account who our prisoners are, and quite frankly, nobody cares.
Okay. You mentioned cost savings. There's a movement to go from public or prisons owned by the states to prisons owned that are contracted to private corporations. How has this worked out for Virginia?
Mel, that is such a loaded question. You'll have me going crazy here. There are just some things that the government should provide. When you cut corners as the government, you can well imagine what private corporations that have stockholders and CEOs who are making well into 7 figures, and it all comes from the profits they derive from making on that they are taking care of human beings in prison. Cost cutting in the worst imaginable ways, worse than what the government does. It is shameful in America that we allow private corporations to run the prisons.
Is this where we get where the medicals are cut back, or the fact that some of these private corporations want to save money, so the biggest place they can save it is the medical area and the food area, I assume?
Both of those have been my experience, but also in employment, where the state pays very poor wages to correctional officers, which bothers me. Private institutions pay even worse. They give fewer benefits. It's a disaster waiting to happen when you get people who are uninterested in their jobs, who are part of a culture that insensitizes them to working with human beings who are troubled in so many ways, and they're expected to do what? I don't know.
Okay, as the attorney, you've identified a problem. Now, what's our solution?
Our solution is to find government representatives who recognize the problems and are progressive. You know, we call ourselves a Christian, Judaic, Muslim nation, but it's a sad commentary the way that we treat our prisoners. It would be a great awakening if these hypocrites who claim to be Christian in particular could better understand really the teaching of Jesus. And mind you, I'm an atheist. I've been an atheist for 45 years, but I think the teachings of Jesus as a great philosopher ought to be followed. And that would mean that many of our representatives who profess to going to church regularly in order to get votes don't care anything about the way we treat our human beings. And quite frankly, I think Governor McAuliffe is surprisingly terrific about criminal justice issues, but I don't think he knows how bad our prison system is. I just honestly don't think he knows.
Okay. Well, we're running out of time. We have about 2 or 3 minutes left. I'm going to let you use that time to sum up and leave what you would like to leave with our audience. What should they take away from this session?
I would love for your listeners for themselves to become radicalized and to talk with their children and grandchildren about America, the real America, and encourage them to read and tell them stories. Whether you're white or black listening to this, it's really important that we bring up an educated community if there's any hope at all of progressing here in the Commonwealth.
Okay. So what is your next step from when you retire, besides going into the prisoner? Are you going to stay in the area? Or are you?
Yeah, sure. This is my home, and I hope to create a foundation that will allow us to raise money to hire lawyers who do nothing but representing prisoners. We have the Legal Aid Justice Center, who helps represent a large segment of our low-income community in civil rights, housing, employment, health care, etc. But we still have nobody to help prisoners in a meaningful way.
Okay. Well, if we can help you out, please let us know. We're going to wrap it up. This has been the Neighborhood Law Center. I'm your host, Melvin Burris, and our guest has been attorney Stephen Rosenfield. And our topic has been civil rights in the criminal injustice system. If you want to see us again or look at other shows we have, go to neighborhoodlawcenter.com or go to YouTube and type in Neighborhood Law Center. And so until next week, peace and God bless.